The second the bedroom went dark, I understood something I hadn't let myself say out loud yet. It wasn't the kind of understanding that starts in your head. It was lower than that, like my body got there first. My hand was still on the lamp switch when the room turned into one black pane of reflected glass, and behind my own faint reflection just outside the window, something moved. At first I thought it was my reflection shifting. That's how ordinary it looked for maybe half a second. Then I realized I hadn't moved. The shape outside did. It crossed slowly through the strip of yard beside my house, not hurrying, not crouching, not acting like someone who'd been caught doing something they shouldn't. It moved until it was directly in line with where my bed sits against the wall. I remember that detail because I had this weird, stupid thought that my bed was suddenly too visible, like I'd arranged it for someone else's convenience without knowing it. Then the shape stopped. I couldn't see a face. Just shoulders, head, that flat dark outline you only get when someone is standing between weak porch light and colder dark behind them. And the part that still bothers me most is that it didn't seem like they were looking into the room. It seemed like they already knew exactly what was in it. A hand came up and pressed against the glass. Not knocking. Not tapping. Just flat against the window, fingers spread. Like they were confirming distance. I live on one of those streets where everybody has the same 3 shrubs out front and the same beige siding, and half the time you only know whose house you're at because of the wreath or the mailbox. It's quiet in a way that sounds safe until you actually need someone to notice something. Then you realize quiet also means nobody is looking outside. Nobody is checking. I've lived there alone for a few years and, honestly, I've always been fine with it. I like routine. I like knowing where everything is. I like a house that makes the same sounds every night. The vent over the stove clicks once when it cools. The second stair down from the landing gives a shorter creak than the others. If the refrigerator motor runs too long, I notice that's just how I am. Being alone never bothered me much because the house always felt predictable. My porch light was part of that routine. I leave it on all night. At first it was because I used to get those late package deliveries that would show up at ridiculous hours, and I got tired of opening the door into complete darkness in socks, trying not to step on a box cutter or a damp welcome mat. After a while, it just became habit. Every night before I went upstairs, I checked the front lock, checked the stove, checked that the porch light was on. Same sequence. Hand on deadbolt, glance at the oven display, little gold pool of light over the front step. Then bed. That night had started completely normal. I had the TV on low in the living room, some rerun I'd seen before, not really watching it. I was half answering emails on my laptop and half eating leftover takeout out of the white carton because I didn't feel like dirtying another plate. It was cold out. You could hear that dry winter sound the siding gets sometimes when the temperature drops fast. Not wind exactly, just the house adjusting. Around 10:30 I looked up because the front of the house dimmed for a second. It was quick. Just a blink. The porch light flickered and came right back. I remember glancing toward the front window and thinking, okay, either the bulb is loose or the power just burped for a second because everyone's heat kicked on at once. It had been cold for days. People overload circuits in the winter. That felt like a complete explanation, and I didn't think about it much after that. I finished the episode, rinsed my container, locked up, and went upstairs. Nothing else happened that night. which, looking back, might be why I kept explaining everything away after that. Because nothing ever happened all at once. Every strange thing showed up by itself in a way that let me keep being reasonable. The next morning I came downstairs earlier than usual because I had a meeting and needed coffee before it. The first thing I noticed was how dark the front hall was. Not pitch black. Just wrong. It took me a second to place it, standing there in my socks on the cold wood floor with that morning house smell, coffee grounds from the machine, and the leftover onion from the takeout container I hadn't sealed right. Then I looked through the narrow glass panel beside the door and saw the porch light was off. I stopped right there. It sounds minor, I know it does. A light being off is not an event, but I knew I'd turned it on. I didn't leave it to memory in a vague way either. It was part of the sequence I do every night, the same way some people check their alarm or set the coffee maker. And the bulb wasn't dead, because when I flipped the switch it came back immediately. So I told myself I must have hit the switch half asleep on the way down. That was explanation one. I held on to it because it let the morning stay ordinary. For the rest of that day I barely thought about it. I worked from home. I ate lunch at my desk. Around late afternoon, a delivery van stopped 2 houses down, and I remember actually looking at my porch light through the front window just because it had crossed my mind again. It was still daylight, but I looked anyway, like I was checking a small argument with myself. That night I made a point of being deliberate. I locked the front door. I stood there and physically tapped the porch light switch up. I even said to myself, okay, it's on. Dumb, but I did. Then I went upstairs. In the morning it was still on. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it somehow made it worse. Because now I had one normal morning and one not normal morning, which meant I could no longer blame a burned-out bulb or some electrical issue. It had become one of those little household mysteries you can live with as long as you don't examine it too hard. I told myself maybe I'd brushed the switch without noticing. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe I'd gotten distracted by my phone. All of that is possible. All of that is normal. 2 days later, I came outside just after sunrise because I had to take the trash bin back up from the curb. There was frost across the grass, that thin white crust that makes everything look sharper. My breath was hanging in front of me, and I was in a hoodie over a t-shirt because I'd underestimated how cold it was. I pulled the bin in, and on the way back I noticed marks in the strip of ground along the side of my house. At first I thought it was where some neighborhood cat had crossed. Then I looked closer. They weren't paw marks, they were shoe prints. Faint but there, not a full clear tread pattern, nothing dramatic, just compressed ovals in the frost where someone had stepped on the narrow path between my side fence and the wall of the house. The side yard isn't useful for anything. It's just enough space for the AC unit, the utility meter, and a skinny run of gravel that becomes patchy grass near the back. Nobody cuts through there. There's nowhere to go. My fence blocks the back unless you use the gate. I stood there holding the trash bin handle and followed the prints with my eyes. They went a short distance in. Then they stopped right below my bedroom window. Not turned around, not continued forward. Just ended where the frost was lighter under the eaves and the ground sat directly beneath the window over my bed. That was the first time my stomach did that small drop it does before your brain catches up. I remember rubbing my thumb against the plastic handle of the bin because the texture kept me focused. I tried to think through it. Could it have been me? No, I hadn't gone around that side. Could it have been from a utility worker? Maybe, but there'd been no truck, no tag on the door, no notice. Could it have been old prints that just showed up weird in the frost? That was the explanation I settled on, even though I didn't really believe it. Old prints, frost making them visible. I checked the window from inside later that day. The lock was engaged, the glass was fine, screen fine, nothing to report. So I let myself calm down. Not all the way, but enough to keep going with the day. That's the thing with being alone a lot. You don't want to make a situation weird if it doesn't have to be weird. Once you decide you're scared in your own house, there's no one there to absorb any of that for you. It's just yours. That night I started checking the windows before bed. I didn't tell myself I was checking because of the footprints. I told myself I should be doing it anyway. Good habit. Basic home stuff. I went room to room, touching the latch on each one. Living room, kitchen, downstairs bathroom, then upstairs. It actually made me feel better for a while because it gave me something concrete to do. The house felt solid again when I put my hands on it. Locked, locked, locked. My bedroom window faces the side yard. I keep cheap off-white curtains there, nothing fancy, just enough to cut the early morning light. Normally I don't think about them. They're either open or closed. That's it. A night or two after the footprints, I was doing the same check and I noticed the right curtain wasn't hanging straight. Not by much. Just enough that the bottom edge bowed inward slightly, as if someone had pushed a few fingers under it and let it fall back wrong. The window was shut. The glass was latched. But the curtain wasn't the way I leave it. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I stood there with 2 fingers on the fabric, staring at it. My first thought was static. Dry winter air, fabric clinging weird. Then I thought maybe I'd brushed it that morning. Then I noticed the little bit of condensation at the lower corner of the glass had a smear through it, thin and curved. Like something on the outside had passed across it. I leaned closer, trying to see if maybe it was just where rain had dried or the screen had rubbed. But it wasn't that. It looked disturbed. Subtle, but disturbed. I closed the curtain fully and checked the latch again. Then I did something I hadn't done before. I turned off the lamp and stood still in the room to see what could be seen from outside. That changes a room. If you've never done it, it changes how you think about every object you own. The room stops being yours for a second. It becomes a display. Bed here, dresser here, lamp here, the soft pile of laundry on the chair, the glass of water on the nightstand, the visible shape of a person if there is one. I opened the curtain just an inch and looked out. All I could see was my own faint reflection and the side yard swallowed in dark. The porch light doesn't really reach that far. It just gives enough spill to shape the fence in the corner of the house. Past that, it's shadow. But that didn't help. If anything, it made me more aware of how somebody outside could stand where I couldn't easily see them, while still seeing the brighter inside of the room if my lamp was on. After that, I started adjusting little things. I kept the bedroom lamp off later into the evening. If I changed clothes, I did it in the bathroom instead of the bedroom. I angled the TV downstairs so its reflections didn't show as clearly in the front window. None of this felt dramatic while I was doing it. It felt practical. Quietly practical. The kind of thing you do when you don't want to admit you're reacting to something because reacting makes it real. A normal person would maybe call someone by this point, or tell a neighbor, or at least mention it casually and hear themselves say it. I didn't. Partly because I felt stupid. Mostly because each piece by itself still had a possible explanation, and I didn't want to be the person freaking out over a flickering bulb and a weird curtain. So life kept going. I worked. I brought groceries in. I took a package off the porch one afternoon and caught myself scanning the side yard before I went back inside. I started locking the side gate even during the day, even though it always sticks and scrapes the concrete in a way that's annoying. I heard normal neighborhood sounds and tried to let them stay normal. A dog barked 2 houses over. Somebody ran a leaf blower at an absurd hour. A basketball thumped in a driveway before dinner. All the harmless noise of people living close together. But whenever night settled in, I became conscious of the windows in a way I never had before. Not of what I saw through them, of what they said about me. Which room I was in, when I went upstairs, when I turned off the TV, whether I was still awake, whether I slept with the curtain cracked. That's what the watched part feels like, if you've never felt it. It isn't just being afraid someone is there. It's realizing your habits are visible if anyone cares enough to learn them. And I started thinking about my porch light differently. For years it had meant convenience, safety even, a lit front step, a house that looked occupied, an easy walk to the door when a package showed up late. Now it felt like a marker, a fixed point. Here is the house, here is the person, they are home. I considered leaving it off, I really did. Then I didn't, because suddenly changing my routine because of a thing I still hadn't proven felt like surrendering to it. Also, and this is honest, I was worried that if someone was actually watching, changing the light would tell them I'd noticed. That thought stayed with me longer than I want to admit. One night, maybe a week after the footprints, I woke up around 3 or a little after. I don't know what pulled me out of sleep, maybe the heat kicking on, maybe nothing. The room felt stuffy, and my throat was dry. I lay there for a minute listening. The house was making its normal middle-of-the-night sounds. Distant refrigerator hum, a tick in the vent, nothing useful. Then I heard a light, brief sound outside, not a knock, not a footstep exactly, more like the soft crackle of dry grass or frost compressing under weight. I sat up. There are moments where you can feel your hearing sharpen. I don't know how else to say it. My whole body got quiet trying to make room for the next sound. I listened so hard my jaw started aching. Nothing came. I told myself a raccoon, a cat, branch dropping. The side yard collects little noises because of how the fence channels wind. That's true. I know that's true. I lay back down, but I didn't sleep well after that. Every time I drifted, I'd surface again and look at the rectangle of curtain like it might move. In the morning, I checked outside, no obvious marks, no broken twigs, nothing. That almost helped. Then it made me wonder if I was starting to manufacture the whole thing. The next couple of nights were quiet enough that I felt ridiculous. That's probably why the final night hit as hard as it did. I had just enough ordinary back that my guard wasn't gone, but it had thinned. I wasn't relaxed exactly. I was tired of my own suspicion. Tired of feeling stupid every time I checked the same latch twice. It was late, closer to midnight than 11. I'd been upstairs folding laundry in a completely boring way, half listening to a podcast through one earbud. the kind of task that should make a house feel normal. I set a stack of t-shirts on the chair, unplugged my phone, and decided I should get to sleep earlier for once. The bedroom lamp was on. Hall light on. Everything else upstairs off. I crossed the room and for whatever reason paused before switching off the lamp. I think I was going to look out the window first just to satisfy the habit and get it over with. The curtain was mostly closed with a narrow break where the two panels didn't quite meet. I could see only dark through it. I hit the switch. The room went black except for the faintest wash of light from outside. And right away something moved across the window. No delay, no slow realization after a sound. It was already there the instant my own room stopped reflecting back at me. A figure passing through the narrow reach of the porch light, close enough to the wall that I couldn't see much except outline. It moved from the back side of the yard toward the center of the window, then stopped dead, exactly where my bed was. My hands stopped working right. I remember that. My fingers were still curled from the lamp switch and they just stayed like that, half closed, as if finishing the motion had used up the last clear instruction my body had. I didn't step back. I should have. I just stared. The figure stood there so still it felt deliberate in a way that panic doesn't. If it had run or crouched or flinched, I think some part of me would have translated it into trespassing, some normal category of danger. But this wasn't rushed, it was patient, like the person outside had time. Then one arm lifted. The hand came up out of the dark and pressed against the glass. I could see the palm flatten slightly, fingers spread wide, almost aligned with the lower edge of the curtain. I don't know if they were looking in at me directly because the face stayed in shadow. I never saw eyes. But I knew in that exact second that whoever it was had not wandered there. They were not checking windows at random. They knew this was the room. They knew where the bed was. And the hand wasn't trying to get in. It was measuring. That thought hit me so hard my knees almost went loose. I backed up then, finally, and the heel of my foot caught on the edge of the rug. I hit the dresser with my hip, hard enough to jolt the framed picture on top of it. The sound felt huge. The silhouette didn't move. That was the part that broke whatever was left of my denial. Any normal person caught outside someone's bedroom window would bolt the second the person inside reacted. This one didn't. I didn't go for my phone charger or a bag or anything smart. I grabbed the keys off the dresser, because they were there, and I left. I don't even remember deciding. 1 second I was in the bedroom, next I was in the hall, moving fast and stupid and too loud, trying not to think about whether the person outside could hear exactly where I was going. I took the stairs without the lights, missed the last step and slammed my shoulder into the wall. My mouth was dry. I could taste that sour metal taste you get when adrenaline shows up all at once. At the front door I had one awful second where I thought, if they're at the side yard, can they reach the front before I can get out? I stood there fumbling the deadbolt because my hand kept slipping. The porch light was still on. I remember seeing that through the glass, bright and steady like it had never done anything wrong in its life. I yanked the door open, ran to my car, got in, locked it, and started it with so much force I thought I'd snap the key. I did not look at the side of the house. I need to be honest about that because people always think they'd look. They think they'd check mirrors, scan the yard, verify what they saw. I didn't. I backed out too fast, tires chirped on the cold pavement, and I drove straight to a friend's place about 15 minutes away. I called him from the road and said, probably too flat, "Hey, I'm coming over, something weird happened." He heard something in my voice and just said okay. Once I was inside his apartment with actual other human sounds around me, heat clicking in the baseboards and a sink running and his dumb little coffee grinder on the counter, I started feeling stupid again. That's the rebound. You get out, and if nothing chased you into the street and nothing shattered behind you, your brain rushes to explain it down to size. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was a teenager. Maybe I'd misjudged distance and the person wasn't where I thought. Maybe the hand wasn't on the glass, maybe it was on the screen. Maybe. I stayed on his couch anyway. Then another night. Then several. Every evening when it got dark, I pictured my room lit up on the second floor in that side yard holding its breath. I did go back during the day with him once to grab clothes and a few things for work. In daylight, the house looked absurdly normal. Mail in the box. Neighbor's recycling bin tipped over by the curb. My own stupid welcome mat crooked because I'd left in a hurry. We walked through every room. Nothing missing, nothing broken. The bedroom window was intact. No prints I could make any use of. If there'd been a hand mark, it was gone. I stayed away longer than I planned to. Long enough that the food in my fridge became a problem and I had to deal with it. Long enough that I started making excuses when people asked why I wasn't at my place. I kept almost moving back in fully, then putting it off one more night. What got to me wasn't only what I'd seen. It was the amount of time behind it. The porch light off, the footprints, the curtain, the sound in the yard. None of that belonged to a single impulsive moment. It suggested repetition. Attention. Someone learning things by simply showing up and being patient. That's the part I still can't settle. If someone had been watching long enough to learn exactly where I slept, did they stop when I left? Or were they still returning to that house after I was gone? Sometimes when I drive past there late and see my own porch light on a timer now, I still catch myself looking at the side window first. Story 2. The next one is a different kind of fear, because this one happened out in the open. I noticed the car because it was doing the one thing that instantly makes a normal street feel wrong. It was sitting there with the engine running and the headlights off. I was halfway down my usual walk home, on the block with the trimmed hedges and the little brick houses that all have the same square porches, and I could hear it before I really looked at it. That low idling hum. Not loud, just steady, the kind of sound you don't usually register unless it's late enough that everything else has gone quiet. My sister was talking in my ear about something at work, and I remember missing half of what she said because I was staring down the street trying to figure out why a parked car would be left like that in the dark. It was pulled against the curb maybe half a block ahead of me. Dark color, 4-door, I think. I couldn't tell you make or model because the streetlights on that stretch are weirdly far apart, and the car was sitting in the gap between two of them. No dome light, no turn signal, no music, just a shape with a motor running. I told myself exactly what you'd tell yourself. Someone waiting to pick somebody up. Somebody on a phone call who doesn't want the lights glaring into a house. Somebody keeping the heater on because it was cold and the windows were probably fogging. All of that sounded fine until I got closer. I was 20 at the time, working late shifts at a little sandwich place that stayed open way later than it should have. Not because the neighborhood needed midnight paninis, but because the owner was convinced college kids would keep us busy if we just stayed open long enough. He was wrong, mostly. Which meant I spent the last hour of most shifts wiping down counters that were already clean and listening to the soda machine hiss. I didn't have a car then, couldn't afford one yet. So I walked home. I hated walking home alone at night. I know some people can do that without thinking about it, but I never could. Even in my own neighborhood, even on streets I knew, I was always aware of how alone I was. I had keys threaded between my fingers sometimes, which I know everybody says not to do, but I did it anyway because it felt like doing something. And I always called my sister. Every single time. She got used to seeing my name pop up around the same hour and just answering with, "You off now?" That routine mattered to me. The call, the familiar houses, the same route, the same spot where I crossed because the sidewalk on my side was broken and always held puddles after rain. It let me act like I was managing the part of the night I couldn't avoid. That night had been normal up until then. I had on my black work hoodie that still smelled faintly like bread and onions. My crossbody bag digging into one shoulder because I had shoved my apron in there without folding it, and my sister was telling me about some guy at her office who kept microwaving fish in the break room. Totally ordinary conversation. The kind that's useful because it gives your brain something else to hold. Then I saw the car. I remember lowering the phone a little from my ear and saying, "Hang on. There's a car here with its lights off." She said, "What kind of car?" And I said, "I don't know. Just sitting there." She immediately went into older sister mode and told me to cross the street if it felt weird. The problem was, at that exact point, crossing the street felt dramatic, like I'd be announcing to whoever was in there that I had noticed them and was afraid. And I always hated that feeling, like if I acted cautious too early, I was somehow embarrassing myself, like I was making a scene in my own head. So I kept walking for a few more seconds. There were houses on both sides of the street, porch lights on, a television flickering blue through one front window. Somebody's inflatable holiday thing half collapsed on a lawn because the fan must have quit. It wasn't one of those empty movie streets where no one could possibly help. That was almost worse. People were around, they just weren't paying attention to me. As I got even with the back bumper of the car, the engine changed, just slightly. That soft rev you hear when somebody shifts from park into drive. I stopped walking for one beat, then forced myself to keep going because stopping right there felt worse. My sister heard the change too through the phone and said my name louder this time. I said, "It's fine, it's probably nothing," but my mouth had gone dry in that annoying way where your tongue feels too big. Then I crossed the street. I did it casually, or I tried to. At least I think I tried. I probably looked exactly like what I was, which was a girl suddenly realizing she didn't want to pass a dark car at close range. I cut across near a parked pickup and kept walking without speeding up. The car rolled forward, not fast. That was the part that made it worse. If it had lurched or peeled away, I think I would have had something simpler to react to. But it just moved enough to stay even with me. Slow, controlled, headlights still off. I said to my sister, "It's moving." And she said, "Run." I didn't. Not yet. Again, this is the stupid logic of not wanting to be wrong. My brain kept trying to build a harmless explanation faster than events were knocking them down. Maybe they were looking for an address. Maybe they had just noticed me and didn't want to spook me, so they were moving slowly. Maybe they were going to turn at the next corner and I was about to feel ridiculous for panicking on the phone over some person trying to find a friend's house. But then I noticed I could hear my own steps and the car at the same time matching. One shoe scraping slightly because the rubber sole was peeling near the toe. And that engine holding back to my pace. A man was sitting on a porch up ahead, maybe 2 houses down, smoking. I saw the orange tip of the cigarette and felt this crazy burst of relief because there was a witness. Another person. Somebody who'd see if this got weird. He never even looked up. I don't blame him, really. Why would he? To him it was just a girl walking in a car on the street. Nothing had happened yet. That's what exposed feels like. The whole scene is public enough that your danger hides inside normalcy. I stopped. I did it suddenly, halfway under a streetlight, and turned toward the car. The car stopped too, not a second later. Right then, I could see the outline of the driver more clearly now because the streetlight hit the windshield just enough. A person leaning forward over the steering wheel, not slouched back casually. Leaning. Watching me. I couldn't see the face. The glare and the dark inside the car flattened everything except posture. I said, "Why is he stopping?" My sister was asking where exactly I was, like street name, cross street, how far from home. She was already in action mode. I could hear her typing or moving around on her end. I started walking again because standing still under that light suddenly felt like I had pinned myself in place for display. The car started again. At that point, the denial part of me cracked. Not all the way, but enough that I stopped trying to act normal for the driver and started acting for distance. I walked faster, not full run, fast enough that my bag started bouncing against my hip, and the apron buckle inside it kept hitting my keys with this little metallic tap. My sister kept talking, saying, "Keep me on. Keep talking, do not hang up." I told her I was almost at the corner near my house. And that corner mattered, because it was where I always slowed down. There was a bright streetlight there and a little dip in the curb where the concrete had sunk. If I was carrying food from work or digging for my house key, I'd usually shift things there and walk the rest more relaxed because home was basically a minute away. I think the driver knew that. I really do. Because the moment I reached the corner, the car changed from pacing me to committing. It accelerated hard enough that the tires made that dry crunching sound over grit at the curb. The headlights still stayed off. It shot forward and pulled halfway onto the sidewalk ahead of me at an angle, cutting off the path so fast I barely processed where the hood ended and the open space around it began. The whole front of the car suddenly filled the stretch of pavement I was aiming for. And before it even fully stopped, the driver's door opened. There wasn't a dramatic scream or some line shouted out the window. That almost would have been easier. It was just the door swinging out into the street and a shape moving behind it like someone was already getting up to come around. My body turned before I consciously decided to turn. There was a narrow alley on the side of the corner house. Not really an alley like between buildings downtown, more like a service passage. A strip of cracked concrete between a fence and a garage that connected to the backs of our yards. I knew it because as a kid we used to cut through there during the day. At night I usually avoided it because it was dark and smelled like wet wood and trash cans. I took it anyway. I remember one hand flying out to steady myself against the fence, and the wood felt damp and rough and left splinters of cold in my palm. My bag snagged on something metal and yanked me sideways for half a second. I nearly lost a shoe because I hit the uneven concrete wrong. Behind me I heard a car door slam. Then footsteps. Real footsteps, fast. That sound did something to me. Up until then there was still this tiny corner of my brain trying to maintain uncertainty. Maybe they were going to ask something. Maybe they were drunk. Maybe I was reading it wrong. The second I heard footsteps chasing me into that narrow space, all of that burned off. I ran harder than I knew I could. Not graceful at all. Loud, gasping, shoulder-clipping fence posts, one of my earbuds falling out somewhere behind me. My sister was still yelling through the phone, but it had dropped down inside my hoodie and her voice was muffled against my chest. The alley turned once around a detached garage and opened behind the row of yards. Mine was 2 houses in. I remember praying my gate wasn't latched with that stupid hook my landlord liked to use because it always jammed. It wasn't. I hit it so hard it banged inward, ran through, grabbed it behind me and pulled it shut with both hands. I don't know if I actually locked it or just dropped the latch. I just know I heard footsteps close, then not as close. Maybe right outside the fence, maybe a little back. I couldn't tell. Everything in my ears had become my own breathing and my sister's voice and the pounding in my neck. I tore across the yard, nearly slipped on the little patch of grass that never drains right, and got to the back door. My key missed the lock twice because my hand was shaking so badly the teeth kept skidding off the metal plate. When it finally turned, I threw myself inside, slammed the door, locked it, then locked the top latch, then stood there with my whole weight against it even though it opened inward, and that did absolutely nothing practical. I listened. For maybe 10 seconds I heard nothing except the refrigerator and the blood rushing in my ears. Then there were footsteps outside, somewhere near the back of the house. Not pounding, not trying the door, just movement over the concrete and dead leaves. Then nothing. My sister was still on the line. She had already called emergency services by then, and I was trying to answer her questions, but I kept stopping to listen because every little house sound had turned suspicious. The heater kicked on and I jumped. A cabinet settled somewhere in the kitchen and I actually put my hand over my mouth because I thought it had come from outside. Police did come, not instantly, but fast enough that I wasn't left alone with it too long. I remember the red and blue light washing across the curtain over the sink and how weirdly normal my kitchen looked under that. Bread on the counter. My work shoes by the mat. My jacket hanging off the chair because I always missed the hook. They looked around the yard, the street, the alley. Took my statement. Asked what kind of car. Asked if I'd seen a plate. I hadn't. Asked if I could describe the driver. Not really, just build and posture and the way he moved out of the car quickly. The officers were nice, but I could tell I wasn't giving them much. Dark car. Male, maybe. Headlights off. Near the corner. It sounded thin even while I was saying it. One of them did say the obvious thing, which was that I did the right thing by changing direction immediately and not letting the person close the distance in front of the car. That sentence stayed with me, because I knew how close it had been to going the other way. If I hadn't crossed the street when I did, the car would have been even closer before I reacted. If I hadn't known that alley was there, I would have had to either stop short in front of the hood or turn around into open street. If I had slowed at the corner the way I always did, to shift my bag or pull out my key, I would have been right where that driver's door opened. For weeks after that, I couldn't do the walk. My sister or my dad picked me up after shifts, or I paid for rides I really couldn't afford. I started noticing every idling car everywhere. Gas stations, curbside pickups, people waiting outside apartment buildings. My whole body would go alert before my mind had even decided whether anything was actually wrong. That's probably the most annoying part of these things. Your brain gets all this credit for logic and decision-making, but once you've had a moment like that, your body becomes the one setting policy. I also kept thinking about how public it was. There were houses right there. Someone on a porch, lights on in windows. I was on the phone with another person the whole time. And still, if I had frozen at the wrong second or tried to handle it politely or worried more about overreacting than getting away, that would have been enough. That's what bothers me when I replay it. Not just that someone decided to do that on a residential street, but how little had to shift for it to work. If I hadn't crossed the street early or taken that alley, would the driver have stopped me directly under the streetlight where I always slowed down? Story 3. The last one is the one I still don't have a clean explanation for. The first sound was my door handle giving a light, quick rattle, the kind you get when someone tests it without any real force. Not trying to break in, just checking. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my reading glasses low on my nose, half paying attention to email and half making notes on a building notice I'd meant to complain about in the morning. The apartment was otherwise quiet. Dishwasher off, television off, windows shut. So the sound carried clearly, one crisp little metal movement from the front door followed by silence. I looked up and waited for the knock that usually comes right after something like that. There wasn't one. I stayed in the chair for another few seconds, listening. My building hallway always has a certain acoustic to it. Kind of hollow because of the tile and the concrete block walls under the paint. You can usually tell the difference between somebody passing by your door and somebody stopping at it. This had been a stop. Then nothing. I remember taking off my glasses and setting them on the table very carefully, as if doing that quietly would help me hear better. I wasn't frightened yet. Annoyed, maybe. Curious. People get the wrong unit. Delivery people glance at a number too fast. Neighbors come home late and try the wrong door after a couple drinks. I've done enough apartment living to know that happens. What bothered me was how deliberate the handle sounded. Not accidental contact. Not a bag brushing it. A test. I live in a mid-rise building downtown, the kind that looks newer than it is because they keep repainting the lobby but never really fix the bones. If you've ever had to live through building management, you know the routine. Notices taped by the elevator. Emails that say important in the subject line for things that should have been handled before they became important. Water shutoffs, FAC inspections, fire alarm testing, pest control sign-ups, package room codes. At one point we had a leak issue that went on so long management was posting updates every few days, and ever since then I've made a habit of reading every notice. Not skimming, reading. Dates, unit ranges, entry times, all of it. Because if you don't, you come home to surprises. I'm methodical by nature anyway. I like clear procedures. I like knowing what access is scheduled, who has a legitimate reason to be in the building, what time a contractor is expected. That's probably why I noticed what I noticed that night, and why it bothered me faster than it might have bothered someone else. It was late, but not absurdly late. Closer to 11 than midnight. I had finished cleaning up from dinner, answered some messages, and was getting ready to head to bed after one more pass through my inbox. I was home alone, which doesn't usually bother me. I've spent enough time by myself in buildings to know the difference between ordinary structural noise and human presence. Pipes knock in one rhythm, elevators shudder through walls in another. People introduce hesitation, pauses, wait where there shouldn't be wait. The first handle rattle had hesitation in it. I stood up and walked to the door, not right against it, just close enough to listen better. The hallway outside smelled faintly like cleaning solution and somebody's overly sweet laundry detergent. Normal building smell. I considered looking through the peephole immediately, but because there had been no knock, I hesitated. There's something about putting your eye to a peephole when you think someone might be right there that makes you feel stupidly exposed even though they can't really see you. I waited, still nothing. So I did what I usually do when I'm not sure if I'm being overly vigilant. I resumed what I was doing. Sat back down, answered one email, flagged another, took a sip of tea that had gone lukewarm. Then I heard footsteps in the hall, not walking past, approaching, then stopping directly outside my door, and staying there. That was the first escalation. Small but distinct. In apartment living, motion is constant background. Doors open, doors close, somebody drags a laundry cart, somebody comes in talking too loudly on speakerphone. What you don't usually get is a person standing silently outside your unit for long enough that you can measure the length of it. I counted without meaning to. 5 seconds. 10, 15. No knock. No phone notification sound from someone waiting on a delivery. No jingle of keys. Just stillness on the other side of the door. I got up again, and this time I did look through the peephole. The fisheye view showed the hallway stretched in yellow under the overhead light. I couldn't see much to the left or right because of the angle, but the portion directly in front of my door was empty. That should have reassured me. It did, briefly. I thought maybe whoever it was had already moved to the neighboring unit. Maybe the sound had echoed oddly. Hallways do that. Apartment buildings are full of false certainty. You think something is outside your wall and it's actually 2 floors up. Then I realized I could still hear the feeling of presence, if that makes any sense at all. Not a sound exactly. More like the silence outside my door had shape to it. I stepped back. I don't like that sentence either, but it's the closest I can get. A few minutes passed. Long enough that I was annoyed with myself for getting wound up. I checked the time on my phone. I reopened the email app. I even laughed once, quietly, because I thought, congratulations, now you're a person spooked by hallway air. Then I made the decision that, in hindsight, shifted the whole night into something else. I called building security. We have a number for after-hours issues. 24-hour service, supposedly. If it's a lockout or suspicious person or somebody setting off the alarmed side exit, that's the number you call. I've used it before for a package room problem, and once when someone was smoking in the stairwell and setting off the detector on my floor. The line rang and rang. No answer. No automated recording, no dispatch, just ring after ring after ring until it disconnected. That irritated me more than it scared me at first. I called again. Same thing, I remember staring at the phone screen thinking that's not possible. Somebody is always supposed to answer. Even if they can't help, they answer. That was the second escalation, and it changed the shape of the problem. Because once the support system fails, the ordinary explanation loses some of its weight. A confused neighbor is one thing. A building with no responsive security while someone may be lingering outside your door is another. I checked the peephole again. Empty hallway. This was the first partial release, the kind that lets you breathe but not fully. I told myself the person had moved on and security was probably tied up downstairs with some other issue. Maybe the desk phone had been left unattended. Maybe there was a break. Maybe the person outside had been at the wrong apartment and now felt just as sheepish as I did. Then my phone buzzed with an email notification. Building management had sent a notice earlier that day. I'd glanced at the subject line but hadn't opened it yet. Something about maintenance. I opened it standing there in the hall light from my apartment spilling onto the entry rug. After hours maintenance checks. That was the phrase. My shoulders dropped a little when I read it. There it is, I thought. That's your explanation. Some contractor or maintenance person got vague instructions, checked the wrong door, maybe realized it, maybe moved on. Incompetent? Yes. Annoying? Yes. But normal building incompetence. I read the notice more carefully. It did not list unit numbers. It did not list a time window. It did not say what systems were being checked. It just said building staff or authorized vendors may require access after standard hours for urgent maintenance verification. That is not how legitimate entry notices are supposed to read. Not in my building. Not in any building run by people with lawyers. They always specify units or floors, a reason, a general time frame, and whether residents need to be present. This notice did none of that. My relief shortened immediately. I read it again, then the timestamp, then the sender address. It looked correct. Official header, logo, all of it. If it had been fake, it was good. I stood there in my socks on the hallway runner, phone in one hand, listening at my own door like a person in a movie, and I hated how quickly my brain had to recategorize everything. Not solved. Not harmless. Just slightly differently wrong. I locked the deadbolt, even though it was already locked. Then engaged the extra latch. I checked the chain even though I never use it. I walked through the apartment and looked at the windows not because I thought someone had come through them, but because it was a task. Methodical action keeps your thoughts from sliding. My apartment isn't large. Entry, short hall, kitchen opening into the living area, bedroom beyond that, bathroom tucked to the side. A simple layout, familiar enough that I can move through it in low light without thinking. That familiarity became part of the problem later because when something in a familiar space sounds off, you know it sooner. I went back to the door and looked again. Empty hall. Then the elevator down the corridor dinged. That was another small release. Someone else on the floor. Good. Somebody coming off the elevator. Some random resident about to turn the whole situation boring again just by existing. I waited to hear footsteps pass. I heard none. Instead, after maybe 15 seconds, there was a soft scrape near the lower part of my door, like rubber against tile. Then nothing. I stepped back so fast I bumped the little table by the entry and sent my mail sliding. At this point, my heartbeat had moved up into my throat. My hands weren't shaking yet, but they had that slightly numb quality where fine motor stuff starts to feel less reliable. I told myself, maintenance cartwheel, bag, shoe, anything. There are a lot of things in a hallway that can scrape. I looked through the peephole again. Still empty. And here's where the spiral part really starts. Because each time I got something that should have reduced the tension, it only reduced one layer. The rest stayed. The hallway looked empty, but somebody had been at the handle. The maintenance notice explained movement, but the notice itself was wrong. Security not answering could have been a coincidence, but it happened on the same night. Every explanation came with a remainder. I texted a neighbor down the hall. A woman I know well enough to borrow a package from, but not well enough to call late unless something is off. I asked if she had gotten the maintenance notice and if she'd heard anything strange in the hallway. No response. Maybe asleep. Maybe out. Completely ordinary. Still, it was another little failure point. I moved to the kitchen and finally poured the cold tea out because the smell of it had gone stale and distracting. I got a glass of water instead, and I noticed I was holding the glass too tightly because the rim clicked against my teeth when I drank. I set it down and listened again. Nothing. This was the second partial release, strong enough that I almost convinced myself to go to bed and deal with management in the morning. I even brushed my teeth. That's the absurd part. There I was, uneasy enough to keep checking the door, still doing nighttime routine because routine is how you try to take authority back from a situation. Toothbrush, sink, face towel. A little mint taste, a little water on the counter. Real life continuing. Then, from the hallway, I heard the door handle move again. Only this time it moved slowly, not a quick test. A deliberate downward press, paused at full extension, then released. Every muscle in my back tightened at once. I walked to the door, then stopped short of it because some instinct said, "Do not put your shadow under the frame." I waited for the knock that still never came. I checked the peephole. Empty hallway. And while I was still standing there, I to the peephole, waiting for the impossible to resolve into something ordinary, I heard a sound behind me. Very faint. A scraping sound from inside my apartment, near the kitchen. I froze so completely that my forehead stayed pressed to the peephole for a second longer than it should have. The hallway remained empty, yellow light, quiet floor, no visible person. But behind me, in the apartment I had just crossed, something made that soft scrape again. Metal or hard plastic dragging lightly over laminate. Not loud, not accidental enough to ignore. At the same time, the handle under my hand began to move from the outside, slowly downward. There are moments where the mind does not present you with options in words. It gives you a map of impossibilities all at once. Somebody was at my door. The hallway looked empty. Something was moving near my kitchen. My apartment had no alternate exit except windows several floors up. I remember smelling the hand soap from the bathroom down the hall because the door was slightly open and the air was warm from the vent. For some reason, that scent is locked to the memory. I did not open the door, I did not call out, I didn't investigate the kitchen. Training, experience, common sense, whatever you want to call it, all collapsed into one decision. Contain. Secure. Call for real help. I backed away from the entry and moved down the hall to the bathroom as quietly as I could. Which was not very quiet because I could hear the floor under me and my own breathing had turned ragged. I got inside, locked the bathroom door, and finally called emergency services instead of building security. I kept my voice low. I gave my address twice because the first time my mouth wasn't working cleanly. I said I believed someone was outside my apartment door and that I had heard movement inside the unit as well. Saying those two things in the same sentence made them sound impossible even to me. The operator did not challenge it. She just kept me talking in that calm, procedural tone that makes you realize procedures exist because nights like this are not as rare as you want them to be. From the bathroom, I could hear almost nothing clearly. That's what made it so bad. If there had been obvious crashing or footsteps running room to room, the threat would have had a shape. Instead, it was the occasional smallest sound. A click I couldn't place. Something brushing lightly. Maybe pipes, maybe not. Once I was sure I heard movement near the front of the apartment. Once I thought I heard it near the kitchen again. The operator asked if anyone was speaking. No. If I could hear forced entry. No. If I knew whether anyone else was in the apartment. No. That no sat heavy. I crouched on the bath mat because standing made my legs feel unreliable. The tile was cold through my pajama pants. I had my phone in one hand and, stupidly, the metal toilet paper holder bar in the other because I'd yanked it loose from the wall without even realizing I was doing it. It came out easier than it should have, which was its own irritating little building failure in the middle of all this. There was another sound at the apartment door. Then silence. Then, from somewhere not far enough away, a faint scrape. I remember looking at the narrow gap under the bathroom door and hating how much black there was on the other side of it. The operator stayed with me until officers arrived. I know it wasn't very long, maybe minutes, maybe fewer than it felt like. But fear distorts that badly. In the moment, it was a whole suspended stretch of time where I had no idea whether I was alone in the apartment, almost alone in the apartment, or being listened to from just the other side of a hollow interior door. When the police knocked and announced themselves, I didn't move immediately because my body no longer trusted voices through doors. They had to repeat it. The operator confirmed units were on scene. Only then did I unlock the bathroom and come out. They cleared the apartment while I stayed in the hall with another officer. I could smell the building's hallway cleaner again and the stale heat from the radiators, and those ordinary smells felt almost insulting. The apartment door was still locked. No visible damage. Windows closed. No one in the kitchen, bedroom, closets, under the bed, nowhere. No signs of forced entry. They checked the whole place. Nothing. That should have resolved it. It didn't. Because building management, when contacted, said no maintenance had been scheduled that night. Not for my floor, not after hours, not at all. The notice email, according to the property manager I spoke with the next morning, had not come from their office. Security, according to them, had been staffed, but no one could explain why the number rang unanswered when I called it. And I know what the obvious conclusion is. Scam notice. Someone trying doors. Maybe hoping a resident would open to supposed maintenance. Maybe somebody got inside a unit and then got out before officers arrived. Maybe the scraping I heard in my kitchen was something mundane and all the rest was the real threat. I have considered every version of it. But there are two details I can't fit neatly. One is the timing. The handle from outside was moving while I heard something from inside. The other is that the hallway outside my door looked empty every time I checked. After that, management changed access codes and sent one of those stern emails about not admitting unauthorized vendors. Neighbors started talking. Quietly at first, then more. Someone on another floor said their handle had moved that same night. Another person said they got the same maintenance notice and ignored it. Security blamed a phone forwarding issue, which is exactly the kind of explanation that sounds made up, because maybe it is and maybe it isn't. I stayed in the building, mostly because moving is expensive and also because ordinary life has a way of reasserting itself whether you approve or not. Rent came due. Packages still arrived. Laundry still had to be done. The elevator still made that little stutter on the way to the lobby. But the building changed shape for me after that, not physically, conceptually. It stopped being a structure managed by flawed but functioning systems and started feeling like a place with gaps in it. Gaps in policy, in access, in response, in accountability. Spaces where somebody could operate between assumptions. I read every notice even more carefully now. Every one. I compare email headers. I look at timestamps. If somebody says maintenance is coming, I want unit numbers, names, credentials, all of it. I check my lock before bed and then once more after I've already turned out the lights. And if I hear hallway footsteps stop outside my door, I don't tell myself it's probably nothing anymore. Because maybe in my case, nothing came of it in the cleanest sense. Nobody was found. Nobody was caught standing inside my kitchen. No report I was shown gave me a satisfying explanation. But if no maintenance was scheduled and security never responded, how many other units had their doors tested that night, and was anyone else actually inside when they thought they were alone? That's the part of it that still feels unfinished whenever I stop at the notice board by the elevator and see residents standing there, reading carefully like they've learned not to assume the building is telling the truth.